Good morning, everyone. We are the Group 2, and today we're going to discuss the practical criticism, cultural studies, and formalism. So first, I'm going to discuss the practical criticism. So practical criticism is a method of literary analysis that focuses on the close reading of a text without considering external factors such as the author's biography, historical context, or social background. It was developed by I.A. Richards and F.R. Lewis in the early 20th century as a way to train readers to analyze texts objectively and evaluate their literary quality based purely on the language, imaginary, tone, and structure. So, ang practical criticism kay nag-focus na siya sa pagbasa ug unsaon pagsabot sa usa ka text nga dili mag-base sa kinabuhi sa author or sa nagsuwat. So, ang main goal ni Richard ani is para ma-train ang readers nga mo-analyze and judge objectively by looking at what's written, meaning to discover nga paunsa ang language itself kay maka-create og meaning and emotion without knowing the author's background. 4 kinds of meaning. So according to Richards, every piece of writing, example kay poetry, kay naay 4 kinds of meaning to help the reader unsaon pag-interpret o pagsabot sa text completely. So ang first kay sense. Sense is that which is communicated by the plain, literal meanings of the words. So, ang sense, mo na siya ang literal meaning sa mga words or kung unsa ang mga gipangsuwat. Ang sense kay mao ang unsa ang imong unang pagsabot or unang nasabtan if ever imong basahon ang usa ka linya or ang whole sentence sa usa ka text. For example, kay the sun rises to the east. So, clearly, unang masabtan na to ana kay ang sun jud kay mag-rise man jud siya sa east. Ang ikaduha kay feeling. Feeling refers to emotion, emotional attitude, desire, pleasure, or displeasure. So ang feeling mao ni ang emosyon nga gipakita sa author through his or her work. So this also means kung unsa ang na-feel sa author mausad ang ma-feel sa mga readers. So for example kay kanang anger. So sa story or sa kanaang novel kay ang gisuwat nga daw sa author is makalagot jud kayo ang kontrabida. So ang reader sad while nagbasa maka-feel sad sila or maka-develop sad sila og anger towards sa kontrabida. So ang ikatulo mo ang tone. Tone means the attitude of the writers towards his readers. So ang tone mo ni ang attitude sa nagsulat towards sa mga nibasa through sa ilang work. So silbi mao ni siya ang tingog nga imong madungog if basahon nimo ang ilaang works. It's either nasuko ba sila, seryoso sila didto, happy, or kanang nag-joke. So example kaniya nga linya. Do you think you've done enough? So katuwa nga tono is sarcastic or kanang murag ng insulto. So ingana na siya ang tone kung unsa ang attitude sa writers towards his readers. So lastly kay ang intention. Intention refers to the effect one tries to produce which modifies one's expression. So ang intention mao ni ang purpose or unsay tuyo sa author nganong iya nang gisuwat. Mausad ni ang reason nganong nagsulat siya, either gusto ba niya malingaw or stress reliever ba niya ang pag-write or ganahan siya maka-inspire sa readers or iyang i-express iyang tanang kasakit or kamingaw diha sa iya ang nasuwat. So mao na siya ang intention. So mao to siya ang 4 kinds of meaning to help readers nga mas makasabot sa ilang gibasa.
So there are 2 types uses of language. The first is the scientific use of language. This kind of language is used when we talk about facts or truth that can be proven. For example, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. It is based on evidence, not on emotion. So, scientific language is used in science or factual statements. The next is the emotive use of language. This one is used to express our emotions or feelings like in a poem or stories. For example, my heart is on fire. It doesn't mean literal nga nasunog, but it shows strong emotion like love or excitement. So emotive language is for feelings, while scientific language is for facts. So there are four misunderstandings of language. The first one is misunderstanding of the sense of poetry. Sometimes people don't get the poem style or meaning, so they understand it wrongly. The second one is over literal reading. This happens when people take figurative words as real. The third one is the defective scholarship. If a reader doesn't study or research well about the poem, they can give the wrong meaning. And lastly, difference in meaning. Some words in poetry have different meanings compared to normal writing. So, when we need to know what the poet really wants to say.
Figurative language. Ang figurative language mao ang paggamit sa mga word nga dili literal nga paagi aron ipakita ang mas lawom nga meaning ug emotion sa usa ka text. Kasagaran gamiton ni sa poetry or prose aron ang usa ka masterpiece mahimong mas nindot ug mas ma-feel sa reader unsay message ana nga text. Pero usahay ang paggamit sa figurative language makahatag og kalibog sa mga readers kay dili man diretso o literal ang meaning mao nga kinahanglan ang magbasa nga adunay imagination, sense ug pagsabot aron makuha ang tinuod nga mensahe sa tula.
So now let's tackle about cultural studies. Culture is derived from the Latin word cultura, which means to honor and protect. Culture is described as a symbolic communication and system of knowledge shared by a large group of people. It is a set of learned beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, social norms, arts, institutions, and knowledge shared by a group of people that shape their way of life and identity. Let us define cultural studies. Cultural studies is an approach that analyzes literature and other culture to understand how people reflect or shape their social structure and identities. It emphasizes how culture is connected to social power, ideology, class, race, and gender, or identity issues. The cultural studies investigates the learned behaviors of societies and subgroups. This study is known in the 1960s through the work of Raymond Williams, Stuart Hall, and the Birmingham School. How does cultural studies function? So, cultural studies function by combining methods from social science, disciplines, and all branches of humanity: sociology, linguistics, literary criticisms, philosophy, and so on. They combine it to thoroughly analyze how culture shapes and how it is shaped by social power, identity, and historical context. In that way, it will be easy to examine the cultural expressions and their impact on society.
Characteristic of cultural study. It aims to examine its subject matter in terms of cultural practices and their relation to power. Its objective is to understand culture in all complex form and to analyze the social and political context within which it manifests itself. It aims to understand and change the structures of dominance everywhere, but in industrial capitalist societies in particular. So ang cultural study kay look for cultural practices and ang ilang connection sa power. Its goal is to understand cultures, forms, and context of usbon ang dominance sa capitalist societies. The origin of cultural studies. It's derived from Center for Contemporary Cultural Study or CCCS at the University of Birmingham, established in 1964. The founding fathers are Richard Haggard, Raymond Williams, E.P. Thompson, Stuart Hall. They concern with the changing of English cultural life.
Major issues in cultural study: identity and difference. Studies how people form their identities and how differences such as race, gender, and class affect social inclusion and exclusion. Representation looks at how media and culture portray people and ideas, influencing how society perceives reality. Spaces and places examines how location like home, school, or city shape cultural experiences, belonging, and identity. High cultural or popular culture questions the divide between elite art and mass entertainment, showing how both express values and power relations. Subject bodies selves explores how individuals understand themselves through their bodies, emotions, and social experiences. Consumption analyzes how buying and using goods or media reflects personal identity, cultural trends, and social status.
So now, let's talk about formalism. Formalism is a literary theory that emphasizes the form and structure of a text rather than its content, author, or context. It is originated in early 20th century Russia with theories like Viktor Shklovsky, Roman Jakobson, and Boris Ichebom. Formalists believe that what makes literature literary is the way language is used artistically. So, formalism is a way of analyzing literature that focuses only on the form, the structure, style, language, and literary devices without considering the author's biography, historical context, or social influences. So, in literature, formalists believe the meaning of a text comes from the text itself, not from the outside factors. They pay close attention to things like imagery, symbolism, word choice, and how the parts of a text work together as a whole. So, for example, a formalist reading of a poem would focus on its rhythm, rhyme, and metaphors rather than the poet's life or the political situation at the time it was written. So, now, let's talk about the history of formalism. So, formalism, also called as Russian formalism, that was created by two groups, which is the Moscow Linguistic Circle founded in 1915 and the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, which is founded in 1916, that was led by Viktor Shklovsky. So first, let's tackle about the Moscow Linguistic Circle. So, the Moscow Linguistic Circle, founded in 1915, was a group of Russian linguists, philologists, and literary scholars who played a key role in developing Russian formalism. They focused on the scientific study of language and literature, emphasizing structure, literary devices, and the functions of language in text. This group laid the groundwork for modern structuralist and formalist approaches to literary theory. Now, the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, founded in 1916 at St. Petersburg, which is led by Viktor Shklovsky. So, the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, which is known as the OPOYAS, was founded again in 1916 at 1961 in St. Petersburg and was led by Viktor Shklovsky and other Russian formalists. The group focused on analyzing the literary techniques that make language poetic, emphasizing concepts like defamiliarization to explain how literature transforms ordinary language. So, the Opoyas played a central role in shaping Russian formalism as a major literary theory movement. So now, formalism stopped being important in the Soviet Union in 1929 because of the lack of political perspective. Formalism lost influence in the Soviet Union around 1929 because it was criticized for lacking a Marxist political perspective. So the Soviet Union authorities saw its focus on literary form over social and political content as elitist and ideologically harmful. As a result, it was denounced and replaced by socialist realism, which emphasized literature's role in promoting communist values. Then, Roman Jakobson made formalism or Anglo-American New Criticism influential in the West. So the Roman Jacobson helped bring formalism to the West by connecting Russian formalist ideas with structuralism and influencing scholars in Europe and the US. Through this work in linguistics and collaboration with literary critics, he helped shape Anglo-American New Criticism, which also emphasized close reading and attention to a text's form over historical or authorial context. His ideas bridge Russian formalism with Western literary theory, making them influential internationally. Then, last one is formalism arose in the 1920s and 1930s and flourished during the 1940s and 1950s. So, by this year, formalism began to take shape in 1920s and 1930s with movements like Russian formalism and later New Criticism in the Anglo-American world. It flourished in the 1940s and in 1950s, especially in the US, where scholars emphasized close reading and the analysis of a text's internal structure, tone, and literary devices. During this time, it became a dominant method of literary criticism in academic institutions.
Terms used in formalism. First, tension. It often involves irony or paradox. Example, in Romeo and Juliet, there's a tension between love and hate, life and death. So formalists would look at how Shakespeare language and contrast create this tension. International fallacy. Formalistic critics refers to the belief that the meaning of a work may be determined by the author's intention as the international fallacy. Example, if an author writes a story about a storm, we don't assume they intended it to symbolize anger unless the text itself shows it. So the meaning comes from the story, not the author's personal explanation. Next, affective fallacy. The belief that the meaning or value of a work may be determined by its effect on the reader. Example, if a reader cries while reading The Little Prince, that emotion doesn't define the literary meaning. So formalists believe that the meaning lies in how the story is written, not just how it makes you feel. Last, objective correlative. Originated by T.S. Eliot, this term refers to a collection of objects, situations, or events that immediately evoke a specific emotion. For example, in Hamlet, Shakespeare uses darkness, cold weather, and the ghost to express fear and uncertainty. These objects and scenes make the audience feel emotion without directly saying it.
Next, let's move on to founders and influential scholars of Russian formalism. So first, Viktor Slavsky. Viktor Slavsky was a Russian and Soviet critic, writer, and pamphleteer. In 1916, he founded the Upayas, one of the two groups with the Moscow Linguistic Circle. So Viktor Slavsky was a Russian and Soviet critic, writer, and pamphleteer who played a major role in developing Russian formalism. In 1916, he founded Upayas, or the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, which became one of the two main centers of formalist thought along with the Moscow Linguistic Circle. His work focused on analyzing the structure and techniques of literary texts rather than their content or social meaning.
The second founder and influential scholars of Russian formalism. Boris Eichenbaum was a Russian and literary scholar and a representative of Russian formalism. In 1918, Boris joined Opuzas group, or the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, and participated in their research until the middle of the 1920s. Eichenbaum provided definition and interpretation for the group and helped outline further approach to literature. For example, when studying a poem, instead of asking, "What does this poem mean?" Eichenbaum would ask, "How is this poem constructed to make readers feel its rhythm or emotion?" The third founder and influential scholars of Russian formalism is Roman Jacobson, was a Russian linguist and literary theorist of the first of the structural analysis of language. which became the dominant trend of linguistics in the first half of the 20th century. Jacobson was among the most influential linguists of the century. For example, when analyzing a poem like The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, Jacobson would look at how the repeated or sounds nevermore create mood and structure.